Welcome to another episode of iSocial Talks. I'm your host, Brian Fanzo, known as iSocial Fans on the Twitters, and today I'm coming to you live from my Jeep Wrangler in my driveway here in Phoenix, Arizona on a beautiful December afternoon. And you might be asking, why am I in my Jeep Wrangler today? And the answer is, we're talking podcasting. So if you've been following me on social media, following me on Twitter, watching these last couple of videos, you'll notice that I've been talking about a new podcast that I'll be releasing. And the questions have been coming in from the community talking about, why are you doing podcasting? What's podcasting different than these iSocial Talk videos that we're doing here? What's the emerging trend of podcasting? So I wanted to give you a quick little background of how I got into it, some things I've learned, and partially I want to talk and shoot this video before I actually push my podcast live. So a year from now we can look back and say, was he right? Was he wrong? What should he have done different? Because we're always trying to learn here on iSocial Talks. So, podcasting. Why is it boomed? Why is it taking off? All kinds of crazy stuff. All right, so why is podcasting taking off? Why is it the new emerging trend? And really, there's lots of stats talking about how many people are listening to podcasts. If you think about it, now we're not attached to, a podcast you used to have to only listen to at work. I've probably been listening to podcasts for 8 or 9 years, but it was something I always did in the office when I was doing something else for work or multitasking. And now, thanks to the iPhones, thanks to the smartphones, thanks to the smart cars, which I'm shooting this on an iPhone 6 Plus right now, the podcasts now are taking out of the office, and they're really able to listen to everywhere. And we all love to listen to music, but we also consume music in different ways. And so, for many, rather than listening to a Sirius radio or one of those other events, we just go dial right onto our iPhone or onto our device, and we listen to a podcast. And podcasting is an emerging trend, and I think it's partially a trend, is we need to find new ways to reach new audiences. You can't exactly have a blog post being read by someone that's in their 2-hour commute to work every day, and they don't have time to consume content while sitting at the office. And when they get home, they want to be with their kids. So we need to have another way to get in their ear, to communicate, to have conversations. Love podcasts. I listen to everything from Pittsburgh sports podcasts to technology podcasts to a ton of social media, marketing, digital podcasts. And you'll make sure there'll be a blog post coming out soon talking about my favorite podcast, as well as my top 10 things I think are what caused me to wait so long for podcasting. But I started researching podcasts to do my own about a year ago. And I started really taking notes during podcasts, not only on my favorite podcast, but what about the podcast that I like? How did I like someone interviewing the guest? What kinds of guests do I like? What's the format that I like? How long will I put up and listen to podcasts? I've been studying probably for a year, and one of my things I'm learning is I shouldn't have been studying that long. I should have dove in there and tried it out. Partially like I did with these iSocial Talks videos that you guys are watching now. If you go back and watch episode 1, we're on episode late 20s right now. If you go back and watch episode 1, I just kind of dove in. I said, I'm not going to deal with editing. I'm not going to deal with all these other things. I'm just going to do it. And I think that's partially what I should have done with podcasting. But instead, I started researching it. I went to Social Media Marketing World. The only reason I went to Social Media Marketing World is I was actually listening to Neil Schaefer's podcast, and he had Mike Stelzer as a guest on there talking about why he created Social Media Marketing World and what the event was going to be about. I then signed up for the event, went to the event. Mike had an entire keynote talking about how podcasting has transformed his life. It's his favorite type of media, and how podcasting is going to do nothing but grow. So since then, we have the AskGaryVee show, Jay Today show that Jay has out there, and all of these guys now are kind of merging a little bit of video as well as a little bit of podcast. I've been lucky enough now to be a guest on about 7 podcasts in 2014 as a guest. Couldn't have been more honored to be on there. I love to talk, as you guys know who follow the show. Talking is not hard for me. But part of the problem I feel with podcasting was the technology isn't exactly easy. You have to know a little bit about RSS feeds. You have to know a little bit about hosting it. You have to understand how to get it into iTunes and to Stitcher and to SoundCloud. And what's the difference between SoundCloud and Stitcher? And why do I have to have them on all these sites? And you should probably also put it as a blog post and embed it and all these things. And really, as I've been studying, I've really noticed that you get overwhelmed by those digital aspects as well as the technology. But when it comes down to it, we'll kind of reach into the J Today, to the J utility book. If you're providing great content, helpful, great content, people can overlook some other things. So I do think the audio is very important, and I know that's something that I'm focusing on in my podcast as I release it. But when you think about it this way, I think too often we're putting all these other hurdles and things into it, and that's why podcasting, people kind of take a while to launch their podcast. I know for me, that's a scary one. The other one is consistency. To be a great podcast, you have to be able to deliver week after week on the same time, or even if you look at John Lee Dumas, Entrepreneurs on Fire, he delivers a podcast every single day. Now that's commitment. And I'll give another shout out to John Lee Dumas. I've been watching his workshops, listening to what he talks about. What he has a community called Podcasters Paradise. And I can't tell you how many things I've learned just from listening and watching John talk about his passion, why he's doing podcasting. And so I'm excited to launch our podcast. Daniel Newman and I are teaming up on a podcast. These shows are actually, I take these, rip the audio from the video, and post these up on SoundCloud. I'm going to make sure to get these into iTunes as well now, so that if you really don't need to be looking at me sitting in my Jeep Wrangler right now to consume this content. But podcasting isn't that overwhelming, but it overwhelmed me. It took me a year to dive into it. But I'm ready to do it. I'm excited. Hopefully you guys are excited about it as well. It's something, it's another opportunity for me to bring in great guests. Love to hear guests that you guys would love to have me on the show. And it's just another way that we can get our voice out there, tell our story, communicate, and have conversations with the audience. So I'm going to share lots of tips and tricks that I've learned trying to podcast, what devices I'm using, what hosting services I'm using, how I got over the hurdle to actually just jump in and do a podcast. And I would love to have your feedback. So one of the things with podcasting is a lot of people feel like it's talking at the audience. I want to make this community-based. So I'll be using a hashtag that you guys can utilize and submit questions, suggestions for the shows. Like I said, I have a couple blog posts coming out. One of my blog posts coming out as a car drives by me right now. One of the blogs I have coming out is lessons learned from studying podcasts, as well as kind of a look inside of my favorite podcasts, the ones I have to listen to every single day that they come out. Hopefully that'll give you guys a peek into the future and kind of the idea of podcasting. I would love to hear about the podcast that you guys are starting. And, feel free, reach out, iSocialFans on Twitter, have be a guest, and help promote your podcast. So why podcasting so hard? I think it's because people get overwhelmed with all these different things rather than just diving in. So I recommend studying a little bit, focusing a little bit on audio quality, making sure that you have the right microphone. But don't get overwhelmed. There's plenty of microphones and headsets that are under $50 that I know a lot of the guys out there, Podcast Answer Man and John Lee Dumas, give you lots of great tips and tricks. And like my friend DJ Waldo said on his podcast, Living Your Passion, part of the thing about podcasting is if you have great guests and you have great content and you have fun doing it, it's a lot of fun. Don't worry about iTunes reviews and all these other things. Once you get out there, once we start monetizing this and adding sponsors and such, then it'll get a little bit more complicated. But with that, I'm excited for my podcast to be coming out soon. Make sure you guys are tuning in for that. Follow me at iSocialFans on the Twitters. As always, thank you guys for tuning in to another iSocial Talks episode. I will be coming at you with a lot more episodes in 2015 on a much more concise delivery method, as I can't wait to kind of bring on some new people onto the team that allow me to deliver this content to you guys on a regular basis. With that, that's another episode of iSocial Talks. Cheers. Have a good one.